Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're discussing artificial intelligence, music, and art. Now, Peter, Universal Music Group, which is the label for both Drake and The Weeknd, put out a statement in response, I think not directly naming this Heart on My Sleeve song, but more generally about the use of AI in the music industry. And I'll read that statement. It says, the training of generative AI using our artists as well as the availability of infringing content created with generative AI, begs the question as to which side of history all stakeholders in the music ecosystem want to be on. The side of artists, fans, and human creative expression, or on the side of deep fakes, fraud, and denying artists their due compensation. Now, this is obviously a very strongly worded statement. And to me, it actually begs a different question, which is Universal Music Group going to foreclose the possibility of their label and their artists using AI to create music? Is the use of this technology so worthy of condemnation that they're not going to use it? Or is it that they only don't want it used when someone else is making money?
I think that the safest way to characterize how any record company is going to respond to this is probably the same way they responded to synthesizers and every other form of technology in the past. It's going
File
to be
sharing.
Yeah, it's going to be about managing and understanding the technology. We know that there is currently technology being developed to help identify when, for example, AI technology is being used in drafting. So the chatbot AI scenario in a university context is something that I know, people are actively working on. So I think that the more we can track, the more that we can essentially reverse engineer these AI works and try and determine what elements, for example, could attract copyright or some other intellectual property, I think the record companies will eventually develop some degree of comfort. But it's just so new, and just like anything new, it's scary.
Melissa, anything you want to add to that?
I would just add that I think in the end, AI will be considered a tool like many other tools, and it can be a tool that's used for good. It can be helpful, or it could be a tool that's used for bad if it's trying to infringe copyright or mimic artists or send out deep fake videos that people cannot determine who's actually saying what. These can be more harmful elements of the tool. So I would hope that in the end, it'll be seen as a tool and used appropriately.
Now, some artists are taking that approach. So the musical artist Grimes, she has actually invited the public to use AI and her voice. And I think her label has created contests to see who can make the best Grimes song using her voice. Is the future, Melissa, do you think going to involve, for example, licensing agreements for the use of a particular artist's voice? And could they put limits on how that could be used? For example, obviously, if it's your voice, you don't want it to be used to say horrible things or say offensive things. Like what could be done with licensing?
I think quite possibly licensing is going to be an element. People often find commercial ways to monetize intellectual property rights or really any right that somebody would like to pay for and use. Currently, people license the rights to their image, likeness, and even voice. If we're talking sound recordings, they're typically a recording that you make, so you know what is actually being distributed. And so there would probably, as you mentioned, need to be more restrictions on an AI-generated voice type license. But restrictions in licensing is very common as well. Currently, there's restrictions on the scope of the license, the manner in which people can use it. Often, if you're licensing personality rights, you would be sort of looking for restrictions on the licensee being able to disparage or defame or use you in some manner that you would not be willing or wanting to be used. Mm-hmm. So there are ways to try to mitigate the risks that could come with using a voice, but not knowing how that voice is implemented.
Peter, anything you want to add to that in about a minute?
Yeah, what I can say is that the concept isn't new. I know, for example, bands like Radiohead in prior years had released excerpts of songs in components so that people could remix them themselves. And then you have, GarageBand, for example, on Apple products, where you've got a number of samples that you can use subject to certain limitations. So this concept of licensing, I think, is the natural progression. It's all about ultimately control, and I don't mean that in a negative way. It's about being able to control the product, how it's used. And so I think that where it does become then controversial is where you start getting into, as has been mentioned, these concepts of deep fakes, and saying or doing things or placing words in somebody's mouth that
they wouldn't say.
concerning.
We've got to go to break, Peter. We will be right back.